You're listening to the LA Football Podcast.
Hey, Los Angeles, what is going on? Welcome to the LA Football Show here on the LA Football Network, LAFBnetwork.com. Excited to get into it as this is your Trojan Huddle. What's up, Trojans fans? Big news out of USC. There's a new AD in town. Announced today, 1 p.m., Carol Folt announced that Jennifer Cohen, formerly of University of Washington, will be your new USC Athletic Director. So we've got a lot to get into, a lot to talk about the hire, a lot to talk about the future, our thoughts on it, what it means for the university, what it means for the sports programs moving forward. And so cannot wait to get into all of it. Joining me as always, the Madman, Jamal Madni. What's up, brother? How we doing?
Doing well, Rye. Excited to be here, and big day in USC athletics history. It feels like we're talking about a new AD every 3 weeks, but hopefully this one will stick for a long time, and excited about this move and what it means moving forward, and always a pleasure being able to speak with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So show is always brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. Head to betonline.ag today. Use our promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV. Gets you a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. SC kicks off the season week 0 on Saturday against San Jose State at the Collie. So you can put some money down on that game. BetOnline.ag, promo code BELIEVE. Tell them the guys at the LAFB Network sent you. Before we get into Miss Cohen, Jamal, and what she means for this program, her past at University of Washington and whatnot, I'd love to just get your initial thoughts on, here we are a week from the season, starting football, that is. Obviously, this is a football show. But basketball is going to be around the corner, men and women. Volleyball is going to be around the corner. So you got all these sports stocking up. How important do you think it was that they made this hire right now before football started instead of prolonging it anymore?
Yeah, Ryan, I think that it was very important because the athletic calendar and the operational calendar, the business side of an athletics department, operate on kind of two different calendars. And so while we're very much in the 2023 season, when you talk about the way an athletic department functions, you're already thinking about the 23-24 year in terms of kind of fiscal year, operational year, and what have you. So all your work in terms of preparation for a season from an athletic department standpoint, whether it's scheduling, whether it's sponsorship, whether it's NIL, whether it's operations, whether it's recruiting, at this point is already done for this season. You're already thinking about next year. And so given next year being the move to the Big Ten, you needed to have a face of the athletic department in place to be able to execute on those things, because then those questions would come up. Well, who's the AD? Who's the face of this organization? Whether I'm a booster, whether I'm an alum, whether I'm a sponsor, whether I'm a recruit, whether I want to be part of this USC ecosystem from a strategy standpoint, that's the first question. And everyone wants to hold off on either providing resources or providing insights until they get that clarity. So this was a really huge move. Again, the on-the-field stuff is fine, but when you look at operationally how an athletic department functions, it's a 23-24 fiscal year, operational year. So you want to have that person in place now because today is the day you start thinking about next season.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And obviously in any realm, the sooner the better. You want to make sure it's the right decision, vetted properly. Obviously what happened with Mike Bohn, that they did the full scope of vetting the candidates and doing that. And what I think was, whether you want to call it impressive or whatever you want to call it, but I think the fact that, Mike Bohn resigns in May. Here we are in August, and it was like, mum is the word. Like, you didn't hear anything about the hiring practices or who was in the building or who the hot candidates were, who even the top candidates were. I believe the LA Times came out with an article, 48 hours ago, that they finally were able to source 3 candidates that they had been able to hear that had actually been in the interview process, but couldn't get anything else. So Carol Folt and her team and the third-party resource that they brought in were definitely kept keeping things close to the vest for this one until they were announced. Basically this morning, Carol Folt in the press release said, we're having a special athletic announcement at 1 p.m. today, which everyone kind of probably knew was going to be the AD. Then it leaked out a little before that. And then at 1 p.m., the official announcement was made. So I think it was good timing, good to get it done. Like you said, the more important stuff is the business side, but even just athletically focused is just not a question anymore. No one needs to think about it. It's just done and move on as they prepare for the USC season starting next week. And then obviously the move to the Big Ten coming, whatever it is, less than a year away from now. So, but now looking at the candidate, not even the candidate, now the new athletic director, the director of all of USC athletics. What's your overall, and for those out there, me and Jamal have not talked about this. This is going to be nice and raw. The first time kind of getting each other's reaction other than just a quick text like, oh, the hire was made. So we wanted to keep it raw and in the moment. So just your thoughts on, Jennifer Cohen and what she's going to mean for USC.
Yeah, Ryan, I think the best way for me to describe it is I like it and I don't like it. And what I mean by that is I'll sort of break that sentence up into the two pieces. Why I like it is it's more a signal from Carol Folt that this is her choice. This is her selection. And the direction of this university is on her watch, for better or for worse. And she is going to oversee all aspects of this university, whether it's academic, whether it's athletic, whether it's extracurricular, what have you. Let's go back a few years to how Mike Bohn was hired, to even how Carol Folt was hired. They were both hired through, for lack of a better term, a good old boys network at USC. They were hired through a handful of trustees that knew each other, that were fraternity brothers in the 60s and 70s. Rick Caruso played such a huge role in both of those hires. Both Mike Bohn and Carol Folt had to go to Rick Caruso's home prior to taking the role. He was the final stamp of approval. And so Carol Folt wanted to break all of that. You can see that she said, as the first full-time female president of the University of Southern California, Wanda Austin, of course, was interim president before Carol Folt took over, former CEO of the Aerospace Corporation. But Folt is the first full-time female USC president, and now she hires the first ever female USC athletic director. And so, for better or for worse, Carol Folt is calling the shots here. And I think you really love to see that as a fan of USC, as a booster, as an alum of USC, because what you want to see ultimately is decisive leadership. And you want the person who's in power, in charge, top of the pyramid to say, look, we are going a certain direction. I have a vision for where I want this to go. You may agree with it. You may not agree with it, but I am going to oversee this. This is going to have my fingerprints all over it. It's going to have my sort of customization all over it. And the decision ultimately rests on me. So that's why I really like this, because it broke up kind of the good old boys network and just a handful of trustees that USC has used in the past to make these type of key hires. Why I don't like it is I'm not particularly impressed with Jennifer Cohen's resume. And when you look at her background, obviously a student at San Diego State, had a couple of administrator roles, and then 24 years at the University of Washington. In her time as athletic director of the University of Washington from 2016, I didn't really see much vision. I didn't see much creativity or output. Everyone kind of talks about the Chris Peterson run at Washington during her time. She didn't hire Chris Peterson. Chris Peterson was already there when Jennifer Cohen was there. And following up kind of a great run with Chris Peterson, she ended up going with Jimmy Lake. That was kind of a disaster. And now she's kind of come back and made a decent hire, and we'll see how that shakes out for UW. When you look at kind of the apparel side of the house, yeah, there was a 10-year, $120 million Adidas deal, but $12 million a year in today's landscape of college athletics is not a whole lot. If you recall, Ryan, UCLA signed a 10-year, $300 million deal with Under Armour. Obviously, that played out very differently, but just the number there was so much higher. And then when you kind of look at the state of the other sports with UW, whether it's basketball, whether it's women's basketball, whether it's some of the other bigger sports, UW has struggled mightily. And their fan base and their boosters would say that they have struggled mightily in those other sports over the last 7 or 8 years. So I like Carol Folt kind of being out in front of this. I'm not quite in love with the Jennifer Cohen hire. It felt very safe. And I think that's probably the direction Carol Folt needed to go, given that Mike Bohn, his exit was just so unceremonious and so unethical. And I think it's quite symbolic that he was ousted for sexual harassment. And now you bring in a new hire that is a female and kind of speaking to female empowerment, which I think is absolutely tremendous. but the candidate itself and Jennifer Cohen, it leaves me wanting more. I think it was a safe hire and in the box hire, but I think there were others out there that were more creative thinkers with greater resumes, and we'll see how it shakes out.
Yeah, so I based my reaction on really what I've read today, because I'll be honest, it wasn't a candidate that I really had. I obviously had heard of her, and obviously Washington's one of the big fish in the Pac-12, so knew of that position. And anytime you can poach from your own conference, I think that speaks highly. And I know the Pac-12 is evolving, but Washington's going to the Big Ten as well, so I think that's always nice. But so my opinion is solely based on what I've read today and research. And so it's not necessarily pushing back against you, just from what I've read. And so a few things that I liked, and I know, you mentioned Chris Peterson, and one thing about that was, yeah, she was not the AD at the time, but she was actually kind of in a Brandon Sosna type role, very instrumental in those conversations to get Peterson here. Didn't make the hire, but she was in some of the interview process, went to Boise State, went in Boise, Idaho for those initial talks. So how instrumental was she? I have no idea, but she was involved to some degree when he came. And then she was AD her first year, 2016, which, as you just alluded to in the beginning, which is so correct, is usually as AD, your role is more a year in advance. But in that first year, Washington goes to the college football playoff, the first year of its inauguration. So there's some solidified success there very early on. Jimmy Lake obviously was a mistake. I thought she handled that fairly well and moving very swiftly. Obviously made what looks like a very good hire in Calen DeBoer. We'll see how much that plays out, but I think that looks to be very, very good so far. And then the other piece, when you talk about the other sports, I mean, from 2016 to 23, 17 Pac-12 titles across all the other sports. So there was some success there. Now,
none of them, though, in major revenue generating sports, Ryan. And that's really
Correct.
what this comes down to. I mean, the water polo championships, great, but, an AD is not going to be defined by that.
No, but it still is, 17 Pac-12 titles is still something that is some accomplishment there. So, just based on that, everything I've heard from other people around the league seems to be she was a rising star candidate. Again, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know everything about all the top ADs. I don't. I have bigger focuses on directly football, so I can't sit here and say, oh yeah, this is someone my top candidate. But just, I don't think any good journalist isn't going to immediately bash someone after a hire. So we'll see how much comes out afterwards. It's a lot of like pleasantries and congrats, but Yogi Roth, who I respect the hell out of, basically said this was a tremendous hire for USC, and he's got nothing but respect for what Jennifer Cohen's done. And they think they got a true rising star. So again, we'll see it play out. Obviously there's a lot of work to be done. But initially my thought was, I thought it was a pretty good hire. I think when you look at, and I'm curious your thoughts, like who your top candidates were for this. I think, the TCU AD comes out as one, and he, I think, pulled his name out after initially interviewing. And then there were a few others that, who was the other one I'm thinking of?
Florida State.
Florida State was another one, who also, if I'm not mistaken, said it was not true, that they weren't even wanting to. And then Atlantic Coast was another one. So, I personally, I like it. So overall, I think I'm happy.
Ryan Dyrud likes a move by USC football. Alert the media there. No, Ryan, I agree with you, and certainly it's a day to be excited about for sure. We don't know how this is going to play out. I think there's always kind of a causation versus correlation. I also kind of saw Bruce Feldman, Yogi Roth. I think a lot of guys that we respect said really positive things. They were vague, even Yogi, kind of what he described was, you could sort of describe it. You could be talking about an AD, you could be talking about a political candidate, you could be talking about a golfer, the way, Yogi Roth described it. So it was vague niceties. But we'll see how it kind of shakes out. I think it'll be interesting. I think, to the earlier point, she inherited a lot of success at Washington, and that 2016 to 2018, and then what she did with that success, to me, is where I'm kind of focused on. Where when you start your tenure already in the college football playoff, already 2 CFPs in 3 years, where kind of that previous regime was able to kind of make those hires and establish that groundwork, and then to sort of see a dip immediately after, that to me is a bit of a red flag, to be completely honest. Now, how much is that on her? How much is that circumstantially in terms of resources? I think that remains to be seen, but that's kind of one area where it was, you sort of inherited the Ferrari and you didn't quite do a lot with it. moving forward. I agree with the kind of the 17 Pac-12 championships, but at the end of the day, if it's not the big two, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really move the needle. So I don't know if that's a resume mover for me. And then I think obviously, Washington did go into the Big Ten, but they were kind of late to the ball game. They're only getting 50% of the revenue share that USC and UCLA are. So they were late to the party because of a lack of decisiveness, because of a lack of vision. So I don't know how much that's a plus versus a minus in her camp as well. So I'm really excited that it's a female. I'm really excited that Carol Folt seems to have broken the mold and in terms of process and really do this on her watch. And we'll see what happens. Is this a slam dunk hire in terms of her resume? I haven't seen enough in her resume in terms of accomplishments to say that, but we'll see how it all shakes out.
Yeah, all fair. So, well, let's look at the future now, because she, kind of like she did at Washington, is inheriting USC in a really good place. I mean, for better or for worse, Mike Bohn, obviously, if whatever he did behind the scenes, obviously was not good, but just strictly in terms of business, he set USC up at least much better than when he got it. And so she's inheriting a great football program that is on the rise with Lincoln Riley. The basketball program is on the rise. I mean, really all their sports, baseball, volleyball, you go on the list. We'll keep it strictly on football though, Jamal. So to you, I mean, well, let's just start with this. The absolute biggest thing for her is how not to lose Lincoln Riley. I mean, that's going to be the biggest thing on her agenda, is keep Lincoln Riley happy, keep Lincoln Riley at USC for at least the duration of his contract, which is 8 more years. And that's going to be the sole focus, because if he were to leave or whatever, then that's going to be a big, I don't know if you want to call it a stain, but definitely a big mark on her tenure of, losing the most important thing to your university. So how do you think she even goes about doing that? And will she accomplish that?
Ryan, it's a great question. And I think that Lincoln Riley is the most powerful person in USC athletics. Lincoln Riley might be the most powerful person at the university. And so, she had talked about earlier today that priority 1 through 100,000 was USC athletics. I would say priority 1 through 100,000 is keeping Lincoln Riley. Because I'll be very honest with you, even when you talk about basketball at USC, even if, hopefully, Bronny comes back 100% who he is, and we want to see him just thrive in terms of success, both collegiately and the NBA with his dad and all of that. But let's say even USC with Bronny and Isaiah Collier and all these great studs, makes a Final Four or maybe even wins a national championship, that'll sort of be a blip in terms of USC history. What USC is at its ethos is football. It is football first, it's football last. And so priority 1 through 100,000, when you say is USC athletics, what you're really saying is it's USC football. So to me, it comes down to, how much Lincoln Riley has built a relationship and how involved was he in the selection of Jennifer Cohen as well. I mean, it was pretty evident that Lincoln Riley had a really nice relationship with Brandon Sosna, had a really nice relationship with Mike Bohn, had a really nice relationship with Rick Caruso. None of those 3 players are really in this selection. So how quickly she can build a relationship of trust with Lincoln Riley, I think, is first and foremost paramount. And then I think second is going to come down to, and she alluded to this in her opening remarks, how she's going to make USC a leader in the nil space. And I think USC is doing more than the other West Coast schools when you talk about the likes of a Washington or a UCLA or a Stanford or, the old heritage Pac-12. But there's still a significant gap in terms of what USC is doing from a nil standpoint versus the likes of the SEC, versus the likes of Michigan and Ohio State and others. So I think, to me, how quickly she can close that gap and get USC on that upper echelon, I think is going to be absolutely critical to keeping Lincoln Riley. Because let's not forget, Lincoln Riley left OU because Lincoln Riley didn't feel like he was on an equal playing field with the likes of the SEC, with the likes of the Big Ten when he got to the playoff. He didn't have as good teams when he got to the playoff. So he felt like there was a deficiency there. And so if he feels like there's a deficiency with his USC teams once he gets to the playoff because they're not spending as much on nil as the guys they're going up against in the semifinal and the final, then guess what? Lincoln Riley is going to be exit stage right, just like he was with OU with USC. So that's going to be where her focus, I think, really needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to, if Lincoln Riley's happy and the football program's winning, then it really doesn't matter who the AD is. Like, that should be literally their role, is just, let's make sure Lincoln Riley's happy. Like we joked a few episodes ago that I was like, Lincoln Riley's basically the AD, because I think he's going to have to get whatever he wants, not in a brat. He's not like a bad person or anything, but just like give him every resource he needs to make sure he stays happy, because that's really all that matters in your job. Like, I would love Jamal to have a job where I have one focus and that's it. I have, yes, all these other things that I'm supposed to do, but really it's one thing that all I really have to focus
Absolutely.
on. And that's the USC AD.
You know what's interesting, Ryan, and me being an alum and going back further than anybody on this network about USC is, I remember the days of Mike Garrett, when Mike Garrett was AD of USC during the Pete days. Mike Garrett, for those who are kind of in the program, alums, what have you, Mike Garrett probably couldn't even tell you where his office was. Mike Garrett probably couldn't even recognize one building from another on campus. Mike Garrett probably couldn't tell you anything outside of the university in terms of facts, statistics, ranking, anything. But the fact that USC was humming with Pete Carroll and churning out BCS bowl appearance and victory and Pac-12 championship and national championship and Heisman Trophy, Mike Garrett was the most beloved guy on campus. And every time he'd sort of ride on his golf cart, everybody would be hooting and hollering and cheering for him. And Mike Garrett probably didn't even know where he was going. He didn't know whether he was going to the doctor's office, his office, the parking lot, where. So it really does speak to, as long as they win, it really doesn't matter. Jennifer Cohen it's that kind of a job where there's certain jobs, and it can be kind of in the airline industry. It can be police officers. It can be firefighters. It can be doctors. When you don't hear about them, that means they're successful. It's when you start hearing about them is when there's a problem. So success for Jennifer Cohen is that today was the most notable day in her USC career. And if she sort of fades to the background and lets the USC football machine do its thing, then she's very, very successful. The bigger the star Jennifer Cohen becomes, that becomes problematic. Like, think back to the USC ADs. Think about Pat Hayden and Lynn Swann and Mike Bohn. When these guys became bigger stars, bigger household names, that was because there was trouble, that there was incompetence. So as long as Jennifer Cohen is less of a star and lets the machine do its thing, she's going to have a decorated career at USC.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, and yeah, the NIL space is going to be a big one. And she mentioned that quite a bit in her opening remarks. And, SC is beginning to, with House of Victory. And, we'll have a really cool announcement here on the network here by the end of this week. We'll just wait. We'll tease it there, announce it into this week. But I think the NIL space is improving, but like you said, it's got a long way to go when you look at the big dogs at college football in terms of that space. And with this jump to the Big Ten, I mean, that's going to be a huge focus on how you build that up, how you differentiate yourself from it, how you align yourself with not just alumni, but with local businesses, with all different sorts of things. And so, one thing that I think Yogi said in his little his 1 minute just breakdown was that she was she was a thought leader. And so we'll see if that preludes into NIL or what it means. But I mean, we'll have to see. And that's going to be a very important piece. So, cool.
I'm excited to see what sort of Yogi meant by that, because thought leader can mean a lot of things. You can be an innovator. You can be a philosopher. You can be, someone who's sitting on the sidewalk in LA on hash, kind of thinking about the future of metaphysics. So thought leader has a lot of different connotations there. And without the specifics, it's hard to kind of understand what that really means. And I think we're sort of in the honeymoon, Feldman, Yogi, it was a bunch of niceties that was, very wide, but very shallow in terms of kind of the niceties. So excited to see kind of specifics, detail, tangibility when it comes to Jennifer Cohen moving forward.
Yep, we will see. So she is officially on the job starting Tuesday, August 22nd. So tomorrow at the time of this recording. And like I said, we are heading into week 0 game this Saturday against San Jose State. So we'll have our preview episode up later in the week. I'll be at practice Tuesday and Wednesday. And like I said, we got a very special announcement, USC specific, coming here soon. We got 2 actually big announcements for USC. So we're hitting USC hard this year. So
you're listening to the LA Football Podcast.